Amy, talking about what takes to make a good CLI. I definitely want to listen to this one.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy, and I'm currently a UX manager here at Canonical for the web and design team. And I'm also working on a product called MAAS. So about 2 years ago, I was tasked to redesign the CLI for MAAS. And MAAS is short for Metal as a Service. And it's also a product I'm currently leading. So MAAS is a data center provisioner. And the best part about MAAS is that if you have all the networking parts set up, it should automatically discover all the physical machines in your data center for you. The thing is, MAAS started out as a CLI product before it even has a UI. So what could possibly go wrong with a CLI-dominated product, right? So I went to a few core developers and field engineers at Canonical just to find out what is wrong with the CLI. And they've got a lot of feedback, but one feedback that they had in common was that the output is not human readable. And it's not human readable because every time you read out a machine, you get this 80 lines of JSON blob, which describes the data structure of that machine. Now, if the output is 80 lines for one machine, think about what it would look like for 10 machines, and 100 machines, and 1,000 machines. At this point, you might wonder, if it's not human readable, then why are you designing the CLI this way? So after digging a little bit, I realized that the early adopters of MAAS don't really interact with the CLI. They write a script in Python through the Foundation Cloud engine to talk to our CLI, and the CLI works as a wrapper for our REST API. So back then, when the UI did not exist, they were scripting for machines to talk to machines. And that's why they don't need the output to be human readable. But as the product evolved, the UI exists, and then people behavior become different. They look for different ways to interact with our products. So let's look at some common structure of the CLI. And all of you here probably has worked with the CLI before, so you know that it's not something magic. Standard structure, there's an input, and then there's an output. But the goal here is we want to create a purposeful input and produce human-readable outputs. That's our goal. But what does it mean to have a purposeful input? Let's take a look at this first example. So the example above, the first one, says MAAS machine read plus the system ID. So that returns those 80 lines of JSON blob, and that is for one machine. Now, if you change it to MAAS machines read, that returns the collection of machine. Now, this singular versus plural form really confuses our user because they're making the same mistakes again and again because they figure out that it's not the plural one, so they use the singular one. So it's not efficient, right? Now, if you look at the second example, you'll see that this is an add node command. One of them has a dash, and the other one does not have a dash. Which one do you think is better for tab completion? Yeah? The second one. And yes, and that's because you have a dash in the clause. So when you do dash completion, every time you have more dash in a command, the more times you have to tab it. And so that is not efficient either. So creating a meaningful verb for a command and making it suitable for tab completion is one of the most fundamental things that you have to think about when designing a CLI. Now let's look at some MAAS-specific problems. So when I was observing people interacting with MAAS, I realized that it takes a lot of practice because you either need to remember those machine IDs by heart, or you have to use some JQ tool to print it out. And that is not something that's going to show you in the UI. That is something you have to sort of learn it. Think about people with 100 machines. They're not going to remember all these IDs, right? So what we do to solve that is to, instead of only having just a system ID, we also accept another argument, which is the name. Names like host names, machine names, any other names. And we changed the verb from read to list. And this way, it doesn't matter if you type machines or machines. You just list something, and if you want to be specific, just list out whatever host name that is. But if you don't want to be specific, it lists out all the machines in your environment. Now, to make it human readable, you make it table by default. But of course, people like options. You always have to give people the option to change the format in case they want to talk to machines again. So you can output the format to YAML, JSON, CSV, or even key value pairs. Another cool thing that we did is to add some help flag in the command. So you can see that in this help page, it describes how you can use -C to customize those columns in the output, and also -filter, which allows you to create a filter and apply that same filter to the same machine again. So every time you come back, you don't have to retype all the filters, just type the filter name and apply those to your machine list. And to make the man page even easier, we apply some of the Unix man page using headings and subheadings to create sections in a man page, which is not what we have before. Which comes to my other point. How do we make a help flag more meaningful? Because help is such a natural thing that our users do when they get stuck. To increase the efficiency of the experience, we try to handle errors and help pages using purposes like for debugging, to help people debug, to help people dig deeper into what their commands are doing and how to customize the outputs. So these are some of the examples of the help pages and error outputs. When an operation fails, we added a command suggestion, such as how you can dig deeper into the output, or a link to the document for that page. Fun fact, so out of 5 users that I tested, what they mentioned was that when you get stuck in the CLI, you don't want to look at docs, because it means you have to do all the search all over again, and it felt like you have to start solving the problem again. So what we did here was we bring the docs to them in a CLI. Sometimes a good design is to know when to reuse what you already have, so don't reinvent the wheel, just roll with it. Now, after testing out this prototype with about 5 to 6 people, I realized that the onboarding experience is another important aspect of our new design, because when you roll out something new, you want to help them learn how to use it as well. So one of the main focus is on learnability. We introduce what's called the interactive prompt on the CLI to help guide our users through these required fields for commands like deploying or creating machines or running testing scripts. And we also provide the equivalent command after you go through this experience, so you don't have to turn on the interactive prompt every single time. Now, the way you select the MAAS instance is by selecting their profile name. So some people have multiple data centers, and they set it up as multiple MAAS instances. And the profile name is the part where you can distinguish between different MAASes. So, what I observed from this experiment is that people who have to work with multiple MAAS instances at the time, they typed the wrong profile name sometimes, and they ended up deploying the wrong machines because it's in a different environment. So to reduce error or to help them recover from some of these mistakes, we took the idea of Git branch and we call it the primary profile. So you're working with one profile at a time, and this prevents error from happening. Talking about errors, we can't avoid making mistakes, but when it happens, we also want to help users recover from these mistakes, stuff such as typos, incomplete commands. And what we did was to provide suggestions. So every time there's a typo, we said, is this what you mean? Or if it's an incomplete command, we suggest something based on the nearest neighbor. Although commissioning, or one of the actions in MAAS, is to commission a machine, normally it takes about 60 seconds if it's successful, but it can take up to 30 minutes for a timeout. So by default, our users prefer to run this task in the background. However, when something is wrong, most people would like to see what's happening in the background. So what we did here is we allow an option for people to see the process prompt. And while running this command in the waiting state, you will see the task list, the runtime, and the waiting indicator. Those are 3 things that help you understand which task went wrong and help you fix the right task. And last but not the least, what I also introduced into the prompt is what we call the help cheat sheet. Do you remember when the first iPhone came out and there's only one button? And every time something goes wrong, you hit that button and the screen resets? This is exactly the purpose of this cheat sheet. When anything goes wrong, when you're working on something, you don't know where to go, you do MAAS help. And it gives you a set of popular commands that can help you get started right away, and some of the suggestions on how you can fix your bugs. And that's what it looks like. So when a user don't know where to start, when they're in an offline environment, this cheat sheet becomes really handy. So what makes a good CLI? Sorry for the typo. A good CLI is based on 3 things. Efficiency. How can you help a user get from point A to point B efficiently? Learnability. How can you onboard a user when they're starting something new? And error tolerance. How do you help them recover from those mistakes? And also extra points for accessibility. So one of the things that I didn't mention in the slide is that I added colors. I forced the colors into the prototype. So I put red for errors, green for success, and yellow for warning. And it looks great on my prototype. It looks great on my terminal. But when I tested out, I realized that I can't control the terminal theme. People are going to use different terminal themes. Some people use a green background, and it's barely even readable. So what we try to do instead is, instead of trying to force the colors into your command line, check for which theme they're using, and then use those colors as the output instead. For any MAAS user in this room, or any MAAS user that's listening, we haven't rolled this out yet, but this work actually influences our CLI guideline here at Canonical. So what we're trying to achieve here is to achieve consistency across different products at Canonical. And I was going to show you the link of our CLI guideline, but it's not on the slide. I'm sorry about that. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, so really interesting. You mentioned like probing the theme. Do you mean the theme of the terminal emulator itself to know what to display correctly so it's meaningful and visible?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Sorry, yeah. At the end you said about the colors of the green, the red, and the yellow, and you said that you don't know what the theme the user may have, so maybe the green will be unreadable on green background. And then you mentioned something about like probing the theme, or did I misunderstand that?
No, just probing a theme, that's correct. So instead of forcing something to be in a specific color, you probe the theme primary color and then set the color to those theme colors instead.
If I may, another question. I noticed the help output. Is that like the sign of things to come, how other Canonical products will have their help output like looking like? Or is it that the general theme is common, but the specific ways the commands are organized may still differ?
So the idea is that different product has different purposes, so it doesn't always have to have those 7 sections. But if you have 3 or 5 out of those 7 sections, great. If not, you know what you're working towards. But it's just a guideline to help you understand that this is what a complete one looks like.
I've already got the cube, sorry. Assuming someone wants to write command line interfaces that follow your guidelines outside of Canonical, is there a library, or is there tooling to help someone like me make better CLIs?
So right now we have a craft library that follows this guideline. It's written in Python, but the prototype that I uses Node.js to create, and I put it together in 6 hours. So that's another option if you are a JavaScript coder. I'm not sure if there are other libraries out there. I know there's something similar in Go.
I'm satisfied with Python, thanks.
Well, it was pretty much the same question. Like, if somebody wants to reuse what you've been working on for other CLI tools, like, how would they go around?
Sorry?
So it's pretty much the same question. It's like, if I want to reuse your work and on another tool, how would I do that?
Yeah. So if you're coding in Python, we have something for the craft library that allows you to apply the same logic. But if you're coding in other languages, we don't have any library that does it yet. That's done by Canonical. Otherwise, you can still read the guidelines on how to approach these with your own logic as well.
So when you mentioned completion, I assume you meant like bash completion, which is like, I think, the most commonly used one. But some shells have a little bit more capabilities in terms of what the completion thing can present. It can present both suggestions and a description of the suggestions. And even within bash, you can have different types of completion or like offered by bash itself. Although, like, unless you read the man pages, most people probably don't even realize there's differences there. Is some of that visible through MAAS as well?
Not on MAAS right now, but in the future, maybe. This is just a prototype. It's still an ongoing discovery that we're looking into, but we haven't rolled it out yet. And so we've got a lot of exciting people who wants to use it, but we haven't really rolled it out yet.
More questions? We have time. No? So thank you, Amy.
Thank you.